Hey everybody, it is Wintermute coming to you from the think tank. And first, let me say Samao to any of my Mongolian viewers. I'm sure there's a lot of you. Um, but from there on, we're going to revisit Mongolia. I'm not going to go back into what I talked about before with China and its relationship with Mongolia and the possibility of that, like I did in the previous video. What I am going to do is talk about something that I found out people were doing that I didn't think was possible, and that is Russia. Apparently, as soon as they can, they go rush in and actually attack Mongolia and conquer Mongolia. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't think that was an option under the rules because of the because of the fact that Mongolia aligns directly with Russia if it is attacked. I figured that wasn't even an option. Never even crossed my mind. But I guess yes. I guess that's so. I actually was talking to another player, and he goes, "Oh yeah, that's actually the current meta." I'm like, "Huh?" He goes, "Yeah, that's the current meta. Is Russia goes in and takes out Mongolia?" And I'm like, "Oh, okay, all right." I have a problem with that for a couple reasons. It's perfectly legitimate if that's the way the rules are written. I don't have a problem with that. However, realistically speaking, it does not make any sense. It is. Here's why. Well, part of the reason they do it is because it's two free basically it's $2, and all you have to do is fight a cavalry and a militia, and then you get 2 victory points for spreading communism. Worldwide communism for the Russian victory objective, spreading worldwide communism. Here's the problem with that. Mongolia was already communist. Yeah, they were communist since 1924. They are effectively part of the Comintern. Historically speaking, they were part of the Comintern for all intents and purposes. While they were technically a neutral during the war, in practice they weren't neutral. They weren't neutral at all. They supplied Russia directly with a lot of war material, and they actually did at the very end of the war declare war on Japan and went across the border into Manchuria with Russian units. Now prior to that, they actually the game itself has the border conflicts here with Manchuria and Russia. Well, the truth is, it should actually come all the way down here. This should be part of the border conflict right here. Because Japan actually did invade Mongolia prior to World War II from Manchuria. And it was a joint Russian-Mongolian force that pushed them back and said, no, that's not where the borders go. The borders are here. So there's that to start with. So mechanically for the rule. So here's the thing. I would argue, and I would vehemently argue this, is just for the sake of historical accuracy, Russia, one, should not be able to attack Mongolia at all. Period. They just can't do it. Number two, as part of that, is no Mongolian territory should be counted for global or worldwide communism victory objective by the USSR, because they already are communist. That doesn't. So it's really, realistically speaking and historically speaking, it doesn't make any sense. So yeah, I would argue that those 2 points right there should be added as a house rule, at the very least. Now, looking at the history of Mongolia, we can actually kind of look at some other variables that we might introduce into a house rule if you wanted to, or house rules to make it a little more complex. For one thing, now in this game, if Mongolia gets attacked, it then allies with Russia. Just like any other neutral would. Here's the thing. Russia already had troops in Mongolia at the time World War II started. There wasn't a ton of troops, but they actually had troops there with the express purpose of defending Mongolia from Japanese aggression. Mongolia and Russia, basically Mongolia was a puppet state of Russia at this point. Full on puppet state, just like Manchukuo was for Japan. There's a little more to the dynamic there. It's not that simplistic and not quite the same, but it was a puppet state. Its economy was designed to work the way it does by Russia for Russia's benefit. And even though throughout the war Mongolia was officially neutral, and the only reason Japan really respected that neutrality is because they got their butts handed to them by Russia and Mongolia prior to the war. Up until then, most other nations in the world saw Mongolia as just being a breakaway part of China. They didn't see it as a sovereign nation. So you could argue that really an attack, and additionally, as Mongolia and Russia were making plans to defend each other with, and Japan got a little hinky, Russia told Japan directly, "We will defend Mongolian borders just as vehemently as we would defend our own home country." So Russia was basically already in Mongolia in some form militarily, and was already defending Mongolia from Japanese aggression. So you could make the argument that an attack on Mongolia is an attack on Russia, and the second that Japan declares war on Mongolia, it immediately aligns to Russia. Not that would have a huge impact, but other than the fact that it basically you have to declare war on Russia if you're going to go into Mongolia. And that is historically accurate for how things were lined up. I would even argue that you might even have the option. The Russian player may even have the option to put one infantry or one unit into Mongolia at any time at once. You could even take that a step further and say, well, so long as Mongolia is neutral, Russia gains one IPP from them. Maybe that's a little steep. Maybe you could do something else with it, but the only reason Mongolia was not fully absorbed into the USSR at this point was because they did not want to alienate the CCP and get into a pissing match with the CCP, because as far as the CCP was concerned, and the KMT for that matter, Mongolia should still rightfully be part of China. So, it was one of those, but at the same time, Russia was already knee deep in Mongolia and how it was forming and how it was run and how things went and operated in that country, and they were hand in hand. So really, like I said, at the very least, just to reiterate, at the very least, I would say Mongolian territory should not be counted for that USSR victory condition of worldwide communism to start. And Russia should not be allowed to attack Mongolia, because it would be attacking another communist country. So that's the very least I would do. And then, like I said, there are some other options you could explore that I think are completely reasonable. I didn't write them up formally because I'm not even sure whether I would go that far at this point, other than introducing those two things. Now, the other thing that I want to bring up is I was told that that's the current meta. That Russia goes into Mongolia as soon as it can, so what would the impact be if you house ruled that option away? Quite frankly, I think it would be good for the game, because that's such you want to talk about low hanging fruit with zero consequences. It already kind of plays into what Russia wants anyway, in terms of creating a border away from its home territory. It's basically free money from 1939 on. And even if you get really unlucky and lose, let's say, 4 infantry, so $12, you're still going to get $2 a turn. So in 6 turns, you're going to make all that back and then be bank. And you're going to have 2 victory points for worldwide communism. And that, again, going back to the original point, is that doesn't make sense realistically, historically. That doesn't make sense. But back to the actual impact on the meta, I think it's too easy for Russia to get those 2 victory points right there, because if the Japanese, let's face it, the Japanese player very likely will sit down and say, I'm not even going to mess with Russia this game at all. Well, guess what? Now there is zero consequence for doing that. Zero. Because the odds of Germany coming into you in 1939 are pretty slim. Not impossible, pretty slim. But you don't even have to commit that many forces there to even risk it. Really, all you need is 2 infantry and then send in a fighter behind each guy, and you'll probably win. The only question is how badly, will you get lucky and roll, a bunch of hits. So it's not like you're stripping away a lot of forces from the front to do that, and it's not like you're risking a lot of forces to do that. So it's quite frankly, it's too easy. It's too easy. I was shocked to find out that was even an option, so I never even considered it. And I think all the nations should have to fight for their victory points a little bit harder than that. So I don't think it will be hurtful to the meta. I think it would be benefit personally. Personally, I think it would be. I'm sure there's some counter arguments to that. Whether it would be good or bad for the meta. But then again, I always look at a game like this, and I always start mentally from a point of historical accuracy and historical realism. And I can't, that to me is enough of a reason to say that this just doesn't make sense. So that's the house rule that I would want to put out there. And then if you wanted to, if you're the kind of person who likes to make it more complex, you can do other things like lending them an infantry, and maybe so long as Mongolia is neutral, giving Russia an IPP a turn when they're at war with a major power, things like that. That might incentivize Japan going in, because it's like, well, now we're gonna, we want to stop that buck from going over there, and so on and so forth. So, there's a lot of variables that can come into play there. You could even, in theory, and I did noodle this one through. I didn't formalize anything, but if the CCP is effectively wiped out, well, then maybe Russia is perfectly willing to, at that point, allow Mongolia to align with them. Maybe it's a roll per turn, because they effectively were aligned. I mean, in all but official documentation, they were basically working together, shoulder to shoulder, in that region to defend Mongolia and to put pressure on the Japanese. But if CCP is no longer there to object, maybe there is a chance that Mongolia should just flip right into Russia. Or another option is, because they did eventually declare war on Japan, well, if Russia ever declares war on Japan, well, then Mongolia immediately aligns with Russia. Again, there's some ups and downs to that, because obviously Mongolia doesn't have a whole lot there to begin with. Russia is not usually in a position where it wants to declare war on Japan. Usually it's fighting for its life against Germany. And even if it does stabilize with Germany and start pushing Germany back, they're not going to have a whole lot of units they want to send over this way till maybe much later in the game. But anyway, all that's what ifs that I'm just throwing out there. I'm not formalizing any of that, other than, like I said, Mongolia should not be able to be attacked, and it should not count towards worldwide communism. So that's my 2 cents on that. And I'm going to push that idea at whatever table I sit at in the future. So, Wintermute, signing out.